She thought she had finally learned to breathe again, until the automatic doors of the emergency room slid open, and her entire world tilted off its axis. Dr. Abigail Rose Morrison adjusted her stethoscope around her neck, the delicate silver pendant catching the fluorescent lights of Boston Children's Hospital. At 7 months pregnant, her movements had become more deliberate, more careful, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. The navy blue scrubs she wore complemented her striking blue eyes, and despite the exhaustion that came with her condition, she maintained the elegant composure that had earned her colleagues' respect. "Dr. Morrison, we have a pediatric trauma coming in," called out Nurse Henderson, her voice cutting through the typical emergency room chaos. 6-year-old female, potential concussion from a playground fall at Brookline Academy. Abigail nodded, pulling her long black hair into a quick ponytail. This was her element, the place where her pain transformed into purpose, where every small patient reminded her why she'd chosen this demanding specialty. As she walked toward the trauma bay, her hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly, a gesture that had become second nature over the past few months. The paramedics burst through the doors, wheeling in a small girl with tear-streaked cheeks and brown hair scattered across the pillow. But it wasn't the child that made Abigail's breath catch in her throat. It was the man running alongside the gurney, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled with panic. Ethan James Reed. Even in chaos, he commanded attention. His tall frame moved with the same controlled intensity she remembered, but there was something different, a rawness in his dark brown eyes that she'd never seen before. The same eyes that had looked at her with desire but never with the vulnerability she'd begged for 6 months ago. "Daddy, it hurts," the little girl whimpered, reaching for Ethan's hand. Abigail's professional training kicked in, suppressing the emotional earthquake threatening to destroy her composure. She approached the gurney, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "I'm Dr. Morrison," she said, avoiding direct eye contact with Ethan. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Olivia Grace Reed," the child replied, her voice small but brave. "I fell from the monkey bars." Daddy was so scared. The irony wasn't lost on Abigail. The same man who'd been too frightened to love her was now trembling with fear for his daughter. She began her examination, her gentle hands checking for injuries while her mind raced with memories she'd worked so hard to bury. "Sir, I need you to step back so I can examine her properly," Abigail said, finally looking at Ethan. The moment their eyes met, she saw recognition flood his features, followed immediately by shock as his gaze traveled to her pregnant belly. "Abigail?" His voice was barely a whisper, the same voice that had once murmured her name in the darkness of their shared nights. She turned back to Olivia, using her patient as a shield against the intensity of his stare. "Let's get some x-rays and run a few tests, okay, honey? You're going to be just fine." As the medical team moved efficiently around them, Abigail could feel Ethan's eyes burning into her back. She knew he was doing the math. 7 months pregnant, 6 months since their devastating breakup. She knew he was remembering that last night when she'd poured her heart out one final time, begging him to say the 3 words that could have changed everything. "Dr. Morrison," Olivia said softly, grabbing her hand. "You're really pretty. Are you having a baby?" Abigail smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed since seeing Ethan. "Yes, I am. In about 2 months." "That's so cool. I always wanted a little brother or sister." The innocent comment hung in the air like a revelation. Abigail could hear Ethan's sharp intake of breath behind her, could feel the weight of unspoken questions filling the space between them. "Olivia's scans look clear," announced Dr. Phillips, the attending physician. "Mild concussion, but she should be fine with rest and monitoring. We'll keep her for observation tonight." As the immediate crisis passed, Abigail found herself alone with Ethan in the family consultation room. The silence stretched between them, loaded with 6 months of unfinished conversations and unresolved pain. "Is it?" he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Your daughter needs you right now," Abigail interrupted, her hand protectively covering her belly. "Let's focus on what matters." But even as she said the words, she could see the questions burning in his eyes. The same eyes that had once looked at her with passion but never with the love she desperately needed. Now they held something different, a desperation that made her heart race despite her best efforts to remain detached. As she turned to leave, Ethan's voice stopped her cold. "Abigail, please. We need to talk." She paused at the door, her hand trembling slightly on the handle. After months of convincing herself she was over him, after building a new life around the child growing inside her, Seeing him again felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. "Some conversations," she said without turning around, "are 6 months too late." And with that, she walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the consultation room with the weight of his mistakes and the shocking possibility that the woman he'd lost might be carrying his child. The coffee in Abigail's hands had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but she couldn't bring herself to take another sip. Sitting in the hospital cafeteria at 11:47 p.m., she stared at the reflection in the dark window overlooking the Boston skyline. The familiar city lights that usually brought her comfort now felt like distant stars, beautiful, but unreachable. Her shift had ended hours ago, but she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when Olivia was still under observation on the pediatric floor, and not when every fiber of her being knew that Ethan was somewhere in this building, probably pacing the halls like a caged animal. Rough night? Dr. Sarah Chen slid into the seat across from her, holding 2 fresh cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." Abigail accepted the warm cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around it like a lifeline. "You could say that. The Reed case seemed to shake you up pretty badly. Do you know the family?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Sarah was one of the few colleagues who'd noticed Abigail's sudden transformation 6 months ago, how she'd thrown herself into work with an almost desperate intensity, how she'd stopped mentioning weekend plans that didn't involve the hospital or her small apartment in Back Bay. "It's complicated," Abigail murmured, her hand moving to her belly where the baby was currently practicing what felt like soccer kicks against her ribs. "The father's still up there," Sarah said gently. "Haven't seen him leave the waiting room once. Hospital security had to bring him coffee and a sandwich." Abigail closed her eyes, trying to push away the image of Ethan keeping vigil over his daughter. This was the man who used to check his phone during their dinner dates, who scheduled their romantic evenings like business meetings. Seeing him completely undone by parental fear had shattered something inside her chest. "Abigail," Sarah's voice grew softer, more concerned. "Is there something you need to tell me, as your friend, not your colleague?" Before Abigail could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the name on the screen. Ethan Reed. "Olivia keeps asking about the pretty doctor with the baby. Would you mind checking on her? She won't sleep." The message was so unlike the man she remembered. No corporate efficiency, no carefully constructed sentences, just a desperate father asking for help. "I have to go," Abigail said, pushing herself up from the chair with more effort than she cared to admit. At 7 months, simple movements had become strategic operations. The pediatric floor was dimly lit, most of the young patients finally asleep after the chaos of the day. Abigail's soft-soled shoes made no sound as she approached room 314, where a thin slice of light escaped from under the door. She knocked gently before entering, and what she saw made her breath catch. Ethan was sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Olivia's bed, his usually pristine appearance completely disheveled. His suit jacket was draped over the chair's arm, his tie loosened, and his white dress shirt was wrinkled from hours of tension. But it was his face that stopped her cold, the raw vulnerability she'd never seen before, the exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. "Daddy, it's Dr. Morrison." Olivia's voice was bright despite the late hour, her face lighting up as if Abigail were her favorite person in the world. "Hey there, sweetheart," Abigail said, moving to the bedside. "How are you feeling?" "My head still hurts a little, but Daddy's been telling me stories about when he was little. Did you know he used to climb trees even though his mommy told him not to?" Abigail glanced at Ethan, surprised. He'd rarely talked about his childhood during their relationship, keeping his past locked away like everything else that mattered to him. "He did he?" she said, checking Olivia's pupils with her penlight. "That sounds very adventurous. He said he was scared of a lot of things when he was my age, but he learned to be brave. Is that true, Daddy?" Ethan's eyes met Abigail's over his daughter's head, and she saw something that made her chest tighten. "Yes, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups forget how to be brave about the things that really matter." The words seemed to carry a weight that had nothing to do with childhood fears, and everything to do with the woman standing beside his daughter's hospital bed. "Dr. Morrison," Olivia said, reaching for Abigail's hand, "will you tell me about your baby? Is it a boy or a girl?" Abigail felt Ethan's sharp attention, his entire body going rigid in the chair. "It's going to be a surprise," she said softly. "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for. That's so exciting. I hope it's a boy. I've always wanted a little brother to teach things to." like how to ride a bike and how to not be scared of thunder. The innocent comment hit both adults like a physical blow. Ethan's knuckles went white as he gripped the chair arms, while Abigail fought to keep her expression neutral. "Olivia, honey, you should try to get some sleep," Abigail said, adjusting the child's blanket. "Your body needs rest to heal properly. Will you come see me tomorrow? If you're still here, of course." As Olivia's eyes finally began to droop, Abigail turned to leave, but Ethan's voice, barely above a whisper, stopped her. "The baby, is it due in February?" She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see the calculation in his eyes, the realization dawning across his features. "Good night, Mr. Reed." But as she reached the door, his voice broke completely. "Abigail, please, don't walk away from me again." The desperation in his tone made her freeze, her hand trembling on the door handle. This was the vulnerability she'd begged for 6 months ago, the emotional honesty that could have saved them. But now it felt 6 months too late and 9 months too complicated. "Some doors," she whispered without turning around, "close for good reason." But even as she walked away, she could feel the weight of his eyes on her back, and the terrible, wonderful possibility that maybe, just maybe, some doors were meant to be opened twice. The familiar chime of Brewster's coffee house should have been comforting, but today it felt like a warning bell. Abigail stood at the counter at exactly 7:15 a.m., just like she had every morning for the past 5 years. The barista, Marcus, already had her usual ready, oat milk latte with an extra shot, though he'd switched her to decaf months ago without her asking. Small-town kindness in the heart of Boston, the kind of gesture that usually made her smile. "Morning, Dr. Morrison." "The usual?" Marcus asked, though he was already sliding the cup across the weathered wooden counter. "Actually," a deep voice said behind her, "make that 2. Abigail's entire body went rigid. She didn't need to turn around to know who was standing there. She could feel Ethan's presence like a shift in atmospheric pressure. The expensive cologne he wore, something woodsy and sophisticated, mixed with the scent of fresh coffee and created a sensory memory that threatened to undo 6 months of carefully constructed emotional walls. "I'd like to talk," he said quietly. "Please." Marcus looked between them, sensing the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. The morning rush was beginning to build behind them. Doctors grabbing coffee before their shifts, graduate students with laptops and dreams, the beautiful chaos of Boston waking up. "I'm going to be late for rounds," Abigail said, not turning around. "Then I'll walk with you." The simple statement held a determination that she remembered all too well. This was the same man who'd built a multi-million-dollar company through sheer will and strategic persistence, but there was something different in his tone. Less corporate authority, more human desperation. "Fine," she said, accepting her coffee with hands that trembled slightly. 5 minutes. They walked out into the crisp October morning, the Boston air carrying hints of autumn leaves and the distant smell of the harbor. Abigail's breath formed small clouds in the cool air, and she pulled her wool coat tighter around her growing belly. Every step felt measured, careful, as if one wrong move might shatter the fragile truce between them. "Olivia was discharged this morning," Ethan said, falling into step beside her. "Clean bill of health. She asked about you 17 times. Despite herself, Abigail felt her lips curve into a small smile. "She's a sweet girl. She gets that from her mother." There was no bitterness in his voice, just simple acknowledgement. Indira always had this way of seeing the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. They reached a small pocket park between the coffee shop and the hospital, and Ethan gently touched her arm. "Abigail, please, can we sit for a minute?" She looked at the bench he indicated, then at her watch. Her first patient wasn't for another 20 minutes, and despite every rational thought screaming at her to walk away, she found herself sitting down. "The baby," Ethan said without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's mine, isn't it?" The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. Abigail studied his face, the same strong jaw, the same dark eyes that had once made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. But there were new lines around those eyes, a tiredness that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "Why does it matter?" she asked instead of answering. "Because I've spent the last 6 months trying to forget you." His voice broke slightly on the words. "Because I've replayed that last night 1,000 times, wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to say what you needed to hear." Abigail felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crack. "Ethan, I remember everything," he continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "How you looked in that blue dress, The one with the little buttons down the front. How you cried when you asked me if I loved you and how I just stood there like a coward. The memory hit her with unexpected force. That night, 6 months ago, when she'd gathered every ounce of courage and laid her heart bare one final time. How she'd begged him to fight for them, to show her that she meant more to him than just convenience and comfort. You said you couldn't give me what I needed, she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. I was terrified. The admission came out raw, unfiltered. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, Abigail. One day they were there, planning my dad's retirement, talking about grandchildren. The next day, gone. Just gone. She'd never known this. In 18 months of dating, he'd mentioned his parents' deaths only once, and only to explain why he didn't like talking about the past. I learned to protect myself by not getting too attached to anything I couldn't control, he continued. Business success, financial security, those things made sense. But loving you felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with my eyes closed. A tear slipped down Abigail's cheek before she could stop it. So you chose safety over love. I chose fear over everything that mattered. He turned to face her fully and she saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. Complete, unguarded honesty. But losing you, God, Abigail, losing you hurt worse than anything I was trying to protect myself from. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, and Abigail winced slightly. Ethan's eyes immediately went to her belly, his face filled with wonder and regret in equal measure. Is it, he started to ask. Due in February, she said quietly. February 14th, actually. Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Ethan's face went through a dozen emotions. Shock, joy, terror, regret. Why didn't you tell me? Because you'd already made it clear that love was too scary for you. I wasn't going to trap you with an unplanned pregnancy. Trap me? He looked genuinely confused. Abigail, if you'd told me, what? You would have proposed out of obligation? Played house because it was the responsible thing to do? She stood up, her professional composure finally cracking. I deserved better than that, Ethan. My child deserves better than that. As she walked away, his voice followed her, carrying a desperation that made her steps falter. What if I told you that I've learned to say the words you needed to hear? She stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she didn't turn around. What if I told you that losing you taught me that some things are worth being terrified for? The words hung in the morning air like a promise, but Abigail forced herself to keep walking, because some promises she'd learned came 6 months too late. The last person Abigail expected to find sitting in her apartment lobby at 6:30 p.m. was Olivia Grace Reed, swinging her small legs from an oversized leather chair. Dr. Morrison! The 6-year-old's face lit up like Christmas morning as she spotted Abigail walking through the glass doors of her Back Bay building. I've been waiting for you. Abigail's eyes immediately scanned the elegant lobby, finding Ethan standing near the concierge desk, looking completely out of place despite his expensive suit. His hair was disheveled again, and she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. What are you doing here? She asked, though her question was directed more at Ethan than his daughter. Daddy said we needed to apologize properly, Olivia announced, hopping down from the chair. And I made you something? The little girl thrust a handmade card toward Abigail, its construction paper surface decorated with crayon drawings of what appeared to be a doctor, a little girl, and a baby. The words, "Thank you, Dr. Morrison," were written in careful first-grade handwriting across the top. Olivia, this is beautiful, Abigail said, genuinely touched. But you didn't need to. There's more, Olivia interrupted, pulling a small friendship bracelet from her pocket. I made this during rest time at school, see? It has blue beads like your eyes. Despite the complicated emotions swirling in her chest, Abigail found herself smiling. She knelt down carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and allowed Olivia to tie the bracelet around her wrist. It's perfect, she said softly. Thank you, sweetheart. Mr. Reed, the concierge called out, approaching with a polite but firm expression. I'm sorry, but as I mentioned, the building has policies about unannounced visitors. Ethan's jaw tightened with embarrassment. Of course, we were just— It's okay, Thomas, Abigail interrupted, recognizing the elderly concierge who'd worked in her building for over a decade. They're with me. She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth, but Olivia's beaming smile made it impossible to take them back. Can we see where you live? Olivia asked excitedly. Daddy said you probably have really pretty things because you're so pretty. Abigail glanced at Ethan, who had the grace to look mortified. Olivia, we can't just invite ourselves. Actually, Abigail found herself saying, would you like some hot chocolate? I was just about to make some. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in her carefully curated living room, Olivia cross-legged on the Persian rug while she colored in a book Abigail had bought for her young patients. The apartment reflected Abigail's personality perfectly, warm but sophisticated, with soft grays and blues, medical journals stacked neatly on the coffee table, and a half-finished baby blanket draped over the arm of her reading chair. This place is so cool, Olivia said, not looking up from her coloring. It's like a grown-up princess castle. Daddy, don't you think it's pretty? Ethan, who'd been sitting stiffly on the edge of the sofa like he was afraid to get comfortable, finally allowed himself to really look around. His eyes took in the framed photos from her medical school graduation, the bookshelf filled with both medical texts and romance novels, the small succulent garden she maintained on the windowsill. It's perfect, he said quietly, and something in his tone made Abigail look up from where she was refilling Olivia's mug. It's exactly what I would have expected from you. What's that supposed to mean? Beautiful, thoughtful, every detail chosen with care. His dark eyes met hers across the small space. Just like you. The compliment hung in the air between them, and Abigail felt her cheeks warm. This was dangerous territory, the space where old attraction met new complications. Daddy, Olivia said suddenly, looking up from her coloring with the brutal honesty of childhood. Why do you look so sad when you look at Dr. Morrison? Both adults froze. Ethan's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips, while Abigail felt her breath catch in her throat. I'm not sad, sweetheart, Ethan said carefully. I'm just thinking. About what? About how sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and they have to figure out how to fix them. Olivia considered this with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities. Did you make a mistake with Dr. Morrison? The question was so direct, so innocent, that it cut through all the careful dancing they'd been doing around the truth. Yes, Ethan said simply, his eyes never leaving Abigail's face. I made a very big mistake. Well, then you should say you're sorry, Olivia declared matter-of-factly. That's what I do when I make mistakes. Mommy says sorry is just the beginning, though. You have to show you mean it. Out of the mouths of babes, Abigail thought, feeling her heart race as Ethan slowly stood up. You're absolutely right, he said to his daughter, but his words were clearly meant for Abigail. Olivia, could you color in the kitchen for a few minutes? Dr. Morrison and I need to have a grown-up conversation. Okay, but don't take too long. I want to show her my picture of the baby when I'm done. As Olivia skipped toward the kitchen, humming to herself, Ethan turned to face Abigail fully. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through her windows cast shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion and regret she'd been too angry to notice before. I know sorry isn't enough, he began, his voice low and rough. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be fixed with words. But Abigail, I need you to know that not a day has gone by in the last 6 months that I haven't regretted walking away from you. Ethan, I love you. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. After 18 months of longing to hear those 3 words, after 6 months of convincing herself she was better off without them, hearing them now felt like cruel irony. It's too late, she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. Is it? He took a step closer and she could smell his cologne, could see the desperation in his dark eyes. Because I've spent 6 months learning how to be the man you deserved all along. I've been in therapy, Abigail. I've been working on understanding why I was so afraid to love you the way you needed to be loved. Before she could respond, Olivia's voice rang out from the kitchen. Dr. Morrison, come see. I drew you and the baby and me and Daddy all together. The innocent excitement in the child's voice shattered the tension in the room, but also drove home the impossible complexity of their situation. Because now it wasn't just about second chances and forgiveness. Now there was a child involved, both the one in her arms and the one growing in her belly, and Abigail realized that some pictures once drawn could never be erased. The last thing Abigail expected when she opened her apartment door the next morning was to find a stunning woman with olive skin and confident dark eyes standing in her hallway, holding a travel bag and looking like she'd stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. You must be Abigail, the woman said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I'm Dr. Indira Castellanos, Olivia's mother. Even at 7 in the morning without makeup and wearing scrubs, Indira radiated the kind of effortless elegance that made other women feel instantly underdressed. Her long black hair was pulled into a sleek, low bun, and despite clearly having traveled through the night, she looked like she could walk into a board meeting without missing a beat. Yes, Abigail managed, suddenly very aware of her own messy ponytail and the fact that she was wearing yesterday's scrubs. Ethan didn't mention that I was flying back from Geneva. Indira's smile was knowing but not unkind. He doesn't know. When I heard about Olivia's accident, I caught the first flight I could. I got your address from the hospital directory. The silence stretched between them, loaded with unspoken questions and assumptions. Abigail could hear her coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen, could smell the oat milk latte she'd started before her shower, but everything felt suspended in this moment of unexpected confrontation. "May I come in?" Indira asked. "I think we need to talk." Against every instinct screaming at her to politely decline, Abigail stepped aside. Watching Ethan's ex-wife walk into her carefully curated living space felt like watching two different versions of her life collide. "Coffee?" Abigail offered, defaulting to the safety of social politeness. "Please, black if you have it." As Abigail moved around her small kitchen, she could feel Indira's eyes taking in every detail of the apartment. The half-finished baby blanket draped over her reading chair, the pregnancy vitamins on the counter, the ultrasound photo held to the refrigerator with a magnet from Harvard Medical School. "Olivia told me about you," Indira said, accepting the steaming mug. "She said you were the most beautiful doctor in the whole hospital, and that you're having a baby in February." "She's a sweet girl," Abigail replied carefully, settling into the chair across from her unexpected guest. "She is, and she's also incredibly perceptive." Indira's dark eyes studied Abigail over the rim of her coffee cup. "She said her daddy looked different when he talked about you. Sad, but also hopeful." Abigail felt her defenses rising. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Indira interrupted gently. "I'm stating facts. Ethan has been miserable for months. His assistant told me he's been working 16-hour days, sleeping in his office, avoiding anything that resembles a social life. And yesterday, for the first time since our divorce was finalized, Olivia said he smiled when he mentioned someone's name. The conversation was taking a turn Abigail hadn't expected. There was no jealousy in Indira's voice, no territorial marking, just curiosity, and something that might have been relief. "Dr. Castellanos." "Indira, please. And may I be direct?" Abigail nodded, though she wasn't sure she was ready for whatever directness was coming. "I loved Ethan for 4 years, Indira said, setting down her coffee cup. "I married him because I thought love would be enough to break through those walls he builds around his heart. But loving someone who can't love you back the way you need, it's exhausting." The words hit closer to home than Abigail cared to admit. "Our marriage ended because I finally accepted that I couldn't be enough for him. Not because I wasn't worthy of love, but because he wasn't capable of giving it. At least not then." Indira leaned forward slightly. "But yesterday, when I called to check on Olivia, she told me something interesting." "What's that?" "She said Daddy cried. Real tears, not just the sad face kind. She'd never seen him cry before, not even when we told her about the divorce." Abigail's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby was beginning to stir with morning activity. "Abigail," Indira continued, her voice gentle but firm, "that baby you're carrying, it's his, isn't it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Abigail could lie, could deflect, could ask Indira to leave. But there was something in the other woman's eyes, not judgment but understanding. "How did you—" "The timing, the way Olivia described his reaction to seeing you, and honestly, the way you're looking at me right now, like you're waiting for me to stake some kind of claim." Indira's smile was almost sad. "I gave up any claim to Ethan's heart a long time ago." "It's complicated," Abigail said quietly. "The best love stories usually are." Indira stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the busy Boston street below. "Can I tell you something about the man you're trying so hard not to love? I never said—" "You don't have to. It's written all over your face." Indira turned back to face her. "Ethan Reed is the most loyal, most dedicated man I've ever known. When he commits to something, his business, his daughter, his responsibilities, he gives everything he has. The problem was never that he couldn't love. The problem was that he was terrified of loving and losing again. His parents," Abigail murmured. "You know about that?" Indira looked surprised. "He never told me the details, just that they died when he was young. It took me 3 years of marriage to get even that much. He told me yesterday. Then he's already more open with you than he ever was with me." Indira picked up her purse, preparing to leave. Abigail, I'm not here to play matchmaker. I'm here because my daughter is falling in love with the idea of having you in her life, and because I've never seen Ethan fight for anything the way he's going to fight for you. How can you be so sure? Indira paused at the door, her hand on the handle, because yesterday, for the first time in our entire relationship, he called me and asked for advice about love, not logistics, not schedules, not co-parenting strategies. Love. As the door closed behind Indira, Abigail sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. The conversation had shattered every assumption she'd made about Ethan's ex-wife, about their marriage, about the possibility of moving forward. But it had also raised a terrifying new question. If Ethan really had changed, if he really was ready to love the way she needed to be loved, was she brave enough to risk her heart again? Especially when this time, it wasn't just her heart on the line, but the heart of the child growing inside her, and the heart of a 6-year-old girl who'd already started calling her drawings our family. Some decisions, she realized, were about more than just second chances. They were about building something entirely new from the broken pieces of what came before. The emergency room had never felt more like a sanctuary until Abigail found herself doubled over in the staff bathroom at 2:17 a.m., gripping the cold porcelain sink as a wave of pain crashed through her abdomen. Not now, she whispered to her reflection, watching her face go pale in the harsh fluorescent light. Please, not now. She'd been having what she'd convinced herself were Braxton Hicks contractions for the past 3 hours, but these felt different, sharper, more urgent. At 31 weeks, this was far too early for anything to be happening. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Through the bathroom door, she could hear the familiar sounds of the night shift, code blue announcements, the squeak of gurney wheels, the controlled chaos that had become the soundtrack of her life. Dr. Morrison? Nurse Henderson's voice came through the door, concerned. Everything okay in there? Abigail straightened up, trying to steady her breathing. I'll be right out, Janet. But as she reached for the door handle, another wave of pain stopped her cold. This time, it was accompanied by something that made her blood run cold. A warm wetness that meant only one thing. She was bleeding. Janet, she called out, her voice cracking slightly. I need you to call Dr. Phillips, and call Dr. Chen. Tell them it's urgent. Dr. Morrison, are you? Now, Janet, please. 20 minutes later, Abigail found herself in the position she'd never imagined, lying in a hospital bed as a patient instead of standing beside one as a doctor. The monitor beside her bed showed her baby's heartbeat, thankfully strong and steady, but the readings on her blood pressure and contractions told a different story. Preeclampsia, Dr. Phillips said quietly, reviewing her chart. Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and with the bleeding, Abigail, we need to keep you here for monitoring, possibly bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. The words hit her like a physical blow. Bed rest meant no work, no independence, no control over the carefully structured life she'd built. It meant being vulnerable, dependent, exactly what she'd spent months proving she didn't need to be. There has to be another option, she said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. I can modify my schedule, work fewer hours. Abigail, Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. You're not just a doctor right now. You're a patient, and you're a mother. Your baby needs you to prioritize their health over everything else. As if summoned by the conversation about priorities, her phone began ringing on the bedside table. The name on the screen made her heart race. Ethan Reed. Don't answer it, she told herself, but Dr. Chen was already reaching for the phone. Maybe you should, she said gently. If this is who I think it is, he has a right to know what's happening. Before Abigail could protest, Dr. Chen had answered the call. Hello? This is Dr. Chen. Yes, she's here. I think you should come to the hospital. No, Abigail said sharply, but it was too late. She could hear Ethan's voice through the phone, urgent and panicked, asking questions that Dr. Chen was calmly answering. 30 minutes later, the sound of expensive shoes moving quickly down the hospital corridor announced Ethan's arrival before he even appeared in the doorway. He was still wearing a suit, but it was wrinkled and disheveled, his tie hanging loose around his neck like he'd run the entire way from his downtown office. Abigail. Her name came out like a prayer, and she could see the fear naked in his dark eyes as he took in the hospital bed, the monitors, the IV line in her arm. You didn't need to come, she said, though even she could hear how weak the protest sounded. Like hell I didn't. He moved to the chair beside her bed and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Dr. Chen told me about the preeclampsia, about the bed rest. Why didn't you call me? Because this isn't your responsibility. Isn't it? His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Abigail, if that's my child, there's no if about it, she interrupted, the words coming out sharper than she'd intended. The baby is yours, Ethan. Due February 14th, conceived 6 months ago during our last night together when I was stupid enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, you actually cared about me. The truth hung between them like a bridge finally crossed. Ethan's face went through a dozen emotions. Shock, joy, regret, determination. Then I'm not going anywhere, he said simply. You can't just watch me. He was already pulling out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Miranda? Yes, I know it's 3 a.m. I need you to cancel everything on my calendar for the next indefinitely and call my lawyer. I need to discuss family leave policies. Ethan, stop, Abigail said, panic rising in her voice. I don't need you to rearrange your entire life. Yes, you do. He set down his phone and looked at her with an intensity that took her breath away. Because for the first time in my life, I understand what's actually important. Not green tech, not board meetings, not proving I can handle everything alone. Another contraction hit, and Abigail couldn't suppress the small gasp of pain. Immediately, Ethan was on his feet, his hand hovering over hers like he wanted to touch her but wasn't sure he had the right. Can I? He asked quietly. Despite every rational thought telling her to maintain distance, she found herself nodding. His hand closed over hers, warm and steady, and something in her chest loosened at the contact. I'm scared, she admitted, the words coming out in a whisper. I know. So am I. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. But we're going to get through this, all 3 of us. How can you be so sure? Because I've already lost you once, and I'm not going to let it happen again. Not when I finally understand what I should have known 18 months ago, which is that loving you isn't something to be afraid of. It's the only thing that makes sense. As the monitors beeped softly around them and the hospital settled into the quiet rhythm of late night, Abigail felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 6 months. Hope. But hope, she knew, could be the most dangerous emotion of all, because now there wasn't just her heart on the line. There was a baby's life, a future that suddenly seemed both more precious and more fragile than anything she'd ever imagined. And sometimes, she realized, the greatest courage wasn't in walking away. Sometimes it was in choosing to stay. The soft knock on the hospital room door at 3:47 p.m. came with a familiar voice that made both Abigail and Ethan look up from the crossword puzzle they'd been pretending to focus on for the past hour. Can we come in? Indira's voice was gentle, but it was the smaller voice that followed that made Abigail's heart skip. Is Dr. Morrison okay? Daddy said she was sick. Olivia's head peeked around the doorframe, her brown eyes wide with concern and her small hands clutching what appeared to be a homemade get-well card covered in glitter and stickers. Of course, sweetheart, Abigail said, automatically smoothing her hair and trying to look less like a patient and more like the composed doctor Olivia remembered. Come in. What she wasn't prepared for was the way Olivia's face crumpled the moment she saw Abigail connected to monitors and IV lines. You look really sick, Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. Are you going to be okay? Is the baby going to be okay? The innocent questions hit both adults with unexpected force. Ethan immediately moved from his chair to kneel beside his daughter, while Indira quietly closed the door behind them. Dr. Morrison is going to be fine, Ethan said gently, though Abigail could hear the uncertainty he was trying to hide. She just needs to rest so the baby can grow big and strong. But why is she in the hospital? Hospitals are for when people are really, really sick. Abigail found herself reaching out her hand toward the little girl. Sometimes, Olivia, even when we try our best to take care of ourselves, our bodies need extra help. That's what the doctors and nurses here are for, to make sure both the baby and I stay healthy. Olivia approached the bed cautiously, as if Abigail might break if she moved too quickly. I made you this, she said, holding up her card. It has butterflies because Mommy says butterflies mean hope, and it has stars because you're like a star doctor who saves kids. The card was a riot of color and childish enthusiasm, with Get Well Soon Dr. Morrison and Baby, written in purple crayon across the front. Inside, Olivia had drawn what was clearly meant to be a family, 4 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. This is beautiful, sweetheart, Abigail said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Thank you so much. Can I touch your belly? To say hi to the baby? Abigail glanced at Ethan, who was watching the interaction with an expression of wonder and pain mixed together. Of course you can. Olivia very carefully placed her small hand on Abigail's rounded stomach, her face serious with concentration. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "This is Olivia. I'm going to be your big sister, okay? Well, kind of sister. It's complicated, but Daddy says the best families are the ones where everyone chooses to love each other." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, and Abigail saw him close his eyes briefly, as if trying to compose himself. "The baby just kicked," Olivia announced with delight. "I think it likes me." "I think so too," Abigail said softly, watching as Ethan's expression transformed into something she'd never seen before. Pure, unguarded love mixed with fierce protectiveness. "Olivia," Indira said gently, "why don't you show Dr. Morrison the other thing you brought?" Olivia's face lit up as she reached into her small backpack and pulled out a well-worn teddy bear with soft brown fur and kind button eyes. "This is Mr. Snuggles," she said seriously. "He's been my hospital bear since I was little. Whenever I was scared or sick, he made me feel better. I thought maybe he could help you and the baby feel better too." The gesture was so purely selfless, so genuinely loving, that Abigail felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. "Olivia, I can't take your special bear." "It's okay," Olivia interrupted. "Mr. Snuggles likes helping people. And besides, Daddy told me that when you love someone, you share the things that are important to you." The statement hung in the air with the weight of childhood wisdom that cut straight to the heart of adult complications. "She's been asking about you every day since we left your apartment," Indira said quietly, settling into the chair by the window. "Asking when she could see you again, if you were taking good care of the baby, if maybe we could all have dinner together sometime. I told her that sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings," Ethan added, his voice rough with emotion, "but that it doesn't change how much we care about each other." "Are you sad, Dr. Morrison?" Olivia asked with the directness that only children possessed. "You look like you might cry, but not the hurt kind of crying. The happy kind." "I think I am crying the happy kind," Abigail admitted, wiping at her eyes. "Because you brought me something very special. Not just Mr. Snuggles, but a reminder of how kind and generous you are." "Will you keep him until the baby comes?" Olivia asked. "So the baby knows they have a big sister who loves them already?" Abigail looked around the room, at Olivia's earnest face, at Indira's gentle smile, at Ethan's expression of overwhelming love and regret. This little girl was offering her family in the purest way possible, with no conditions or complications, just open-hearted acceptance. "I would be honored to take care of Mr. Snuggles," she said solemnly. As Olivia carefully arranged the teddy bear on the bedside table where both Abigail and the baby could see him, she chattered about all the things she planned to teach her new sibling: how to ride a bike, how to make friendship bracelets, how to not be scared during thunderstorms. But it was her parting comment, delivered with the casual confidence of childhood, that left both adults speechless. "I'm really glad Daddy found you, Dr. Morrison. He's been sad for a long time, but when he talks about you, he gets the same happy face he had when he used to read me bedtime stories when I was little." After Indira and Olivia left, promising to return the next day, the hospital room felt both emptier and somehow more full of possibility. "She's incredible," Abigail said quietly, her hand resting on Mr. Snuggles' soft fur. "She gets that from her mother," Ethan replied, but he was looking at Abigail when he said it. "But I think she's getting something new from you too." "What's that?" "The belief that families can be built on love instead of just obligation." The words settled between them like a promise, fragile but real, because sometimes, Abigail realized, the most important lessons came from the smallest teachers. And sometimes the courage to rebuild came from tiny hands that were brave enough to share their most treasured possessions with strangers who might become family. 3 weeks of bed rest had taught Abigail Morrison exactly how much she hated being still, but it had also taught her something far more valuable: how to accept help without losing herself in the process. The converted guest room in Ethan's brownstone felt like a careful negotiation between independence and necessity. He'd moved mountains to make her comfortable, installing a hospital bed by the large window overlooking his small garden, setting up a desk where she could review patient files remotely, even hanging her framed medical school diploma on the wall so she'd feel at home. "Your morning latte," he said, appearing in the doorway with a steaming mug and the careful expression he'd worn for the past 3 weeks, loving but cautious, as if she might disappear if he moved too quickly. "You don't have to wait on me," Abigail said, though she accepted the coffee gratefully. At 34 weeks pregnant and with her blood pressure finally stabilizing, she was allowed small amounts of caffeine again. "I know I don't have to," Ethan replied, settling into the armchair he'd moved into her room for their morning conversations. "I want to." It was a distinction that had taken her weeks to understand. This wasn't the dutiful care of a guilty ex-boyfriend. This was something deeper, more intentional. He'd rearranged his entire life around her medical needs without making her feel like a burden, somehow managing to be present without being overwhelming. "Olivia's soccer game is at 10, he said, consulting the family calendar on his phone. "She wanted me to ask if you felt up to watching from the car. The field has parking right along the sideline." The image of watching a 6-year-old play soccer from the front seat of Ethan's BMW should have felt ridiculous, but instead, it felt like exactly the kind of normal she'd been craving. "I'd love that," she said, then hesitated. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" She gestured to the room, to the careful attention he'd been paying to her every need. "You could have hired a nurse, made sure I had proper care without disrupting your entire life." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his own coffee cup as if it held answers to questions he was still learning to ask. "Do you remember what you said to me that last night?" he finally asked. 6 months ago, when you were standing in my kitchen wearing that blue dress?" Abigail felt her chest tighten. She remembered everything about that night. The desperation in her own voice, the way she'd begged him to fight for them, the cold emptiness in his eyes when he'd told her he couldn't give her what she needed. "You said that love wasn't supposed to be this hard," Ethan continued, his voice rough with memory, "that if someone truly loved you, choosing you should be the easiest thing in the world. I remember. You were right." He looked up at her then, and she saw something in his dark eyes that took her breath away. Complete certainty. "Choosing you is the easiest thing I've ever done. Taking care of you, being here, rearranging everything to make sure you and the baby are safe. None of it feels like sacrifice, it feels like purpose." Before Abigail could respond, the sound of small feet thundering up the stairs announced Olivia's arrival. "Dr. Morrison, guess what?" Olivia burst into the room wearing her soccer uniform, her hair pulled back in pigtails that were already coming loose. "Coach Martinez said I might get to play midfielder today instead of just defense." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Abigail said, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "You've been practicing so hard. Will you really come watch, even though you have to stay in the car? I wouldn't miss it for anything." What followed was exactly the kind of beautifully ordinary morning Abigail had never imagined could be hers. Sitting in the passenger seat of Ethan's car, watching Olivia run across the field with fierce determination, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the simple pleasure of being part of a family's weekend routine. "She's incredible," she murmured, watching as Olivia successfully stole the ball from an opponent and sent it flying toward the goal. "She gets that competitive streak from Indira," Ethan said, but there was pure pride in his voice. "But the kindness, that's all her own. She asked me yesterday if the baby would call her sister or just Olivia," Abigail said quietly. "I didn't know what to tell her." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you say?" "I told her that families come in all different shapes and that love is what makes them real, not what people are called." "And what did she say to that?" "She said that made sense because she calls Indira Mom even though Indira isn't her biological mother, and it never felt weird because love made it true." The words hung between them, loaded with implications about their own complicated situation. They weren't a traditional family, might never be one, but watching Olivia celebrate her first goal of the season by pointing directly at their car, Abigail felt something shift in her chest. "Abigail," Ethan said suddenly, his voice urgent in a way that made her look at him instead of the field. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I've been going to therapy since the day after I saw you at the hospital. Dr. Rebecca Winters. She specializes in attachment trauma and grief counseling." Abigail felt her breath catch. "Ethan, I know it doesn't fix the past," he continued quickly. "I know it doesn't undo the months when I was too scared to love you the way you deserved. But I'm learning things about myself, about why I built those walls so high. And more importantly, I'm learning how to tear them down." "What kind of things?" "That losing my parents when I was 19 didn't just make me afraid of losing people. It made me afraid of having anything worth losing. That success in business felt safe because companies can't die in car accidents, but loving someone, really loving someone, meant being vulnerable to that kind of devastating loss again." He turned to face her fully, and she could see tears gathering in his eyes. But these past 3 weeks, taking care of you, watching you grow our child, seeing how Olivia lights up every time you smile at her, I finally understand what Dr. Winters has been trying to tell me, which is that love isn't about guarantees. It's about choosing someone every day, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. And Abigail, I choose you. Every morning when I wake up and make your coffee, every time I hear you laugh at something ridiculous Olivia says, every time I feel our baby move, I choose you. The words she'd waited 18 months to hear, delivered not in passion, but in quiet certainty, sitting in a car at a 6-year-old's soccer game. It was so perfectly imperfect, so beautifully ordinary, that she felt her last defenses finally crumble. Ethan, she whispered, reaching for his hand. I know I don't deserve another chance, he said quickly. I know I hurt you in ways that might never heal completely, but if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what love looks like when someone isn't afraid to give all of it. Before she could answer, Olivia's voice rang out across the field, calling their names as she ran toward the car with her arms raised in victory. The game was over, and by the glow on her face, her team had won. But as Ethan squeezed her hand and they both prepared to celebrate with Olivia, Abigail realized that some victories were bigger than soccer games. Some victories were about learning that second chances weren't just about forgiveness. They were about having the courage to build something new and beautiful from the ashes of what almost was. And sometimes those victories happened in the front seat of a car, surrounded by the ordinary magic of a Saturday morning that felt like the beginning of everything. The pain that woke Abigail at 4:23 a.m. was different from anything she'd experienced during her weeks of careful monitoring. Sharp, insistent, and accompanied by a wetness that made her heart race with both terror and impossible hope. Ethan, she called out, her voice tight with controlled panic. Ethan, I need you. He appeared in her doorway within seconds, his hair mussed from sleep, but his eyes immediately alert. 3 weeks of vigilant care had trained him to wake at the slightest change in her breathing. What's wrong? He asked, moving quickly to her bedside. I think the baby's coming. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and she gripped the hospital bed's railing with white knuckles. It's too early. 6 weeks too early. The words hung in the air like a prayer and a curse combined. At 34 weeks, the baby would have a good chance of survival, but the road ahead could be complicated, uncertain, terrifying. Okay, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the panic she could see in his dark eyes. We're going to be okay. Let me call the hospital and then we'll get you there. But even as he reached for his phone, another contraction gripped Abigail with an intensity that made her cry out. This baby wasn't waiting for careful hospital preparations or controlled medical environments. Ethan, she gasped, I don't think we have time. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Ethan on the phone with 911, his voice steady as he provided their address and Abigail's medical information. The paramedics arriving with equipment and calm efficiency, transforming his elegant brownstone into an impromptu delivery room. Olivia appearing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, eyes wide with confusion and excitement. Daddy, what's happening? Is Dr. Morrison okay? The baby's coming, sweetheart. Ethan called up to her, even as he held Abigail's hand through another contraction. Can you wait in your room? Mommy will be here soon. But Olivia, with the stubborn determination of a 6-year-old who'd claimed this family as her own, crept halfway down the stairs where she could see everything while staying out of the way. Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital, the lead paramedic said. But Abigail could see in his eyes what she already knew. There wasn't time. The baby's coming now, she panted, feeling the overwhelming urge to push. I'm a doctor. I know when there's no more time. What followed was nothing like the calm, controlled delivery she'd planned. Instead, it was raw and primal and terrifying and beautiful, happening in the converted guest room of the man who'd broken her heart and was now holding her hand like his life depended on it. I can see the head, announced the paramedic. One more push, Dr. Morrison. I can't, Abigail gasped, exhaustion overwhelming her. It's too early. What if something's wrong? What if... Hey, Ethan's voice cut through her panic, firm and gentle. Look at me. Abigail, look at me. She turned her head to meet his eyes, those dark eyes that had once seemed so cold and were now blazing with love and determination. You are the strongest person I know, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her sweaty palm. You save children's lives every day. You've carried our baby through 6 months of heartbreak and stress and medical complications, and you've kept them safe. You can do this. We can do this." The words gave her strength she didn't know she still had. With a final push that felt like giving everything she had left, she brought their child into the world in a rush of relief and terror and overwhelming love. "It's a girl," the paramedic announced, and the sound of a baby's cry, strong and indignant and absolutely perfect, filled the room. "She's okay?" Abigail asked frantically, trying to see through her tears. "She's breathing? She's beautiful," Ethan whispered, his own voice breaking as the paramedic placed their daughter on Abigail's chest. "She's absolutely perfect." The baby was tiny but fierce, her little fists waving in protest at the bright world she'd entered too soon. Her skin was pink and healthy, her cries strong and clear, and when she opened her eyes for the first time, they were the same deep blue as her mother's. "Oh," Abigail breathed, all her fear dissolving as she looked down at this miracle they'd created. "Hello, little one. You're here? You're really here. Does she have a name?" asked the paramedic as he continued his assessment. Abigail looked at Ethan, this man who'd fought so hard to become worthy of this moment. "What do you think?" "Grace," he said without hesitation, his finger gently stroking their daughter's tiny hand. "Grace Morrison Reed, because she's given us both the grace to become better than we were. Can I come see her now?" Olivia's voice piped up from the stairs, where she'd been watching in fascination rather than fear. "Is my little sister okay?" "Yes, sweetheart," Ethan called back, tears streaming down his face. "Come meet your little sister, Grace." What followed was a moment that would be burned into Abigail's memory forever. Olivia creeping carefully toward the bed, her eyes wide with wonder as she looked at the tiny baby in Abigail's arms. "She's so little," Olivia whispered, "but she looks really strong. Like you, Dr. Morrison." "She's going to need to be strong," Abigail said softly, already thinking about the NICU stay that would likely follow, the weeks of careful monitoring and gradual growth. "That's okay," Olivia said with the confidence of childhood. "She has a really good family to help her, and Mr. Snuggles is already in her room waiting for her." As the paramedics prepared to transport them to the hospital for proper medical care, Abigail found herself looking around the room that had become the unlikely setting for the most important moment of her life. This wasn't the sterile delivery room she'd planned, with its controlled lighting and medical equipment. This was messy and unpredictable and absolutely perfect, just like the family they'd somehow managed to create from the broken pieces of their individual lives. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked, as the paramedics lifted the stretcher. Abigail looked down at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her arms despite her dramatic entrance into the world. Then at Olivia, who was already planning all the things she would teach her little sister. Then finally at Ethan, whose eyes held a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. "Yes," she said, and for the first time in 6 months, she meant it completely. "We're ready." Because some love stories didn't end with a kiss or a proposal or even a wedding. Sometimes they began with a tiny cry in the early morning darkness, announcing that hope had a heartbeat, and second chances came with the perfect weight of new life in your arms. 2 weeks in the NICU had taught Ethan Reed more about love than 32 years of carefully constructed walls ever could, but it was the quiet moment at 2 a.m. when he finally understood what forever actually meant. Grace Morrison Reed, all 4 pounds and 12 ounces of her, was finally strong enough to be held for more than a few minutes at a time. The forest of tubes and monitors that had surrounded her for the first week had gradually diminished until only a small oxygen cannula remained, a reminder that she was still fighting to grow into the strong little girl everyone could see she was destined to become. "She has your stubborn streak," Abigail whispered, adjusting Grace's tiny pink hat as she settled deeper into the NICU's rocking chair. "The nurses say she's been pulling at her feeding tube every chance she gets." "That's definitely from you," Ethan replied softly, unable to keep the wonder out of his voice as he watched his daughter's tiny fingers curl around Abigail's thumb, the determination to do things her own way, on her own timeline. The NICU at night had a peaceful quality that the busy daytime hours lacked. Most of the other babies were sleeping, their parents either at home getting rest or dozing in uncomfortable chairs. But Ethan hadn't left the hospital since Grace was born, catching sleep in 40-minute increments between feeding times and medical checks. "You don't have to stay every night," Abigail said, though there was no conviction in her voice. She'd grown used to his constant presence, the way he brought her coffee at exactly the right temperature, and knew instinctively when she needed 5 minutes alone to process the overwhelming reality of their situation. "Yes, I do," he said simply. "This is where my family is." The word hung between them with a weight they'd been dancing around for 2 weeks. Family. Not obligation, Not guilt, not even love in the abstract, but the deep, unshakable commitment that came with choosing someone not just for who they were in the perfect moments, but for who they were in the 2 a.m. feedings and the insurance paperwork, and the terrifying wait for test results. Ethan, Abigail began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words that felt too big for the quiet space they occupied. What is it? I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. She looked up from Grace to meet his eyes directly. I forgive you, not because you've earned it, not because you've proven yourself worthy, but because holding on to that anger was like carrying poison in my chest. I forgive you because I choose to, because I want to build something new instead of trying to fix something that was broken from the start. The words hit him with the force of absolution he'd never thought he deserved. But before he could respond, she continued, but forgiveness isn't the same as trust. Trust has to be built day by day, choice by choice, and I need to know that you understand the difference. I do, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know that saying I love you was just the beginning. I know that love is a verb, not just a feeling. And I know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you what that looks like. Grace chose that moment to make a small sound. Not quite a cry, but a soft protest at being discussed instead of being the center of attention. Both parents immediately focused on her, Abigail adjusting her position while Ethan gently stroked her tiny cheek. She's perfect, he breathed, still amazed that something so beautiful could have come from the wreckage of their first attempt at love. She's ours, Abigail corrected softly. Complicated and early, and absolutely not what we planned, but ours. The sound of soft footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of their night nurse, Patricia, whose warm smile had become a source of comfort over the past 2 weeks. How's our little fighter doing tonight? She asked, checking Grace's monitors with practiced efficiency. Growing stronger every day, Ethan replied, and Patricia's knowing smile suggested she was talking about more than just the baby. Dr. Martinez will be doing rounds in about an hour, Patricia said, but from what I can see, someone's going to be ready to go home very soon. Home. The word carried implications that none of them had fully addressed yet. Abigail's apartment was beautiful but small, with no room for the equipment Grace might still need. Ethan's brownstone had space but felt too much like accepting charity. They were navigating the practical logistics of a relationship that had skipped straight from heartbreak to parenthood without passing through the traditional stages of reconciliation. We need to talk about logistics, Abigail said, as if reading his thoughts. We do, but not tonight. Ethan moved his chair closer to hers, close enough that their knees touched. Tonight, let's just be here, all three of us, together. What followed was one of those moments that would anchor itself in their memories forever. The quiet intimacy of new parents in the soft light of the NICU, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, while the rest of the world continued its urgent pace beyond the hospital walls. I have something for you, Ethan said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. I've been carrying it around for a week, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Ethan, if this is what I think it is, it's not a proposal, he said quickly. Not yet. I know we're not ready for that. But I wanted you to have this, to know that my intentions are serious, that this isn't just about grace or guilt or trying to do the right thing. He opened the box to reveal not an engagement ring, but a simple band set with Grace's birthstone, a small amethyst surrounded by tiny diamonds. It's a promise ring, he explained. A promise that I'm going to keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep choosing you and Grace every single day until you're ready to believe that this is real. Abigail stared at the ring, tears gathering in her eyes. You can't promise forever, Ethan. Life is too unpredictable to... I can promise today, he interrupted gently, and tomorrow, and the day after that, and eventually, all those todays will add up to forever. Before she could respond, a small commotion in the hallway announced the arrival of their most frequent visitors. Olivia's stage whisper carried clearly through the NICU's quiet atmosphere. Mommy, you have to be extra quiet because all the babies are sleeping. I know, sweetheart, came Indira's equally soft reply. Let's go see how Grace is doing. Olivia appeared first, moving with the careful reverence she'd developed around the NICU, followed by Indira carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of a woman who'd driven through Boston traffic at 2:30 a.m. without complaint. How's our little princess? Olivia whispered, peering at Grace with the devoted attention of a big sister who took her job very seriously. Getting stronger every day, Abigail replied, automatically making room for Olivia to sit on the arm of her chair. Can I tell her about the soccer game tomorrow? I scored 2 goals yesterday and I want to make sure she knows her big sister is really good at sports. As Olivia launched into a detailed description of her athletic achievements, delivered in the earnest whisper of childhood enthusiasm, Ethan found himself watching the tableau they made, Abigail holding their daughter, while Olivia chattered about everything Grace needed to know about being part of their family, Indira quietly organizing the chaos with the efficiency of a woman who'd learned to navigate complicated love with grace. This wasn't the family any of them had planned. It was messier, more complicated, built on the foundation of broken first attempts and hard-won second chances. But it was theirs, and it was real, and it was exactly what all of them needed. "Ethan," Abigail said softly, holding out her hand for the promise ring. "Put it on." As he slipped the band onto her finger, Grace opened her eyes for the first time that night, looking up at the collection of faces surrounding her with the serious expression of a baby who knew she was exactly where she belonged. "Welcome to our beautiful mess, little one," Abigail whispered. "We're going to love you so well." And in that moment, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the quiet conversations of a family learning to love each other without fear, Ethan finally understood what Dr. Winters had been trying to teach him. Love wasn't about guarantees or perfect timing or even knowing how the story would end. Love was about showing up again and again, until showing up became the most natural thing in the world. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love gave you a second chance that was even better than the first. The sound of tiny feet running across hardwood floors, followed by slightly bigger feet chasing after them, had become the soundtrack of Saturday mornings in the Reed Morrison household, and Abigail wouldn't trade the beautiful chaos for all the quiet in the world. "Gracie, you can't feed Mr. Snuggles your pancakes." Olivia's voice carried down the stairs with the exasperated authority of a 9-year-old who took her big sister duties very seriously. "He's a teddy bear." "Teddy hungry," came Grace's triumphant reply, delivered in the confident tone of a 3-year-old who knew exactly what she wanted, and wasn't particularly interested in logic that suggested otherwise. Abigail smiled as she stood at the kitchen counter of their renovated brownstone, whisking eggs for what had become their weekly tradition of weekend breakfast chaos. Through the large window, she could see Ethan in the garden with his sleeves rolled up, planting the vegetables that Grace had insisted they needed so Mr. Snuggles could have real carrots, not store carrots. The past 3 years had been a masterclass in learning that love was less about grand gestures and more about the small, consistent choices that built a life together. Like the way Ethan still brought her coffee every morning, but now it came with tiny fingerprints on the mug because Grace insisted on helping. Like the way they'd learned to navigate the complexities of co-parenting with Indira, who spent every other weekend with them, and had become not just a co-parent, but a genuine friend. "Mama, tell Olivia that Mr. Snuggles likes pancakes," Grace announced, appearing in the kitchen doorway with syrup in her dark hair, and her father's stubborn expression firmly in place. "I think Mr. Snuggles probably prefers to watch you eat pancakes," Abigail suggested diplomatically, lifting Grace onto the counter and grabbing a washcloth to tackle the syrup situation. "You always take Olivia's side," Grace pouted, but there was no real upset in her voice. At 3, she'd already mastered the art of dramatic protest without actual distress. "I take the side of clean teddy bears and happy breakfast times," Abigail replied, pressing a kiss to Grace's forehead. "Now, do you want to help me finish the eggs?" What followed was the kind of beautifully messy cooking collaboration that would have horrified the perfectionist version of herself from 4 years ago. Grace helped by talking constantly to the eggs, explaining that they needed to be fluffy like clouds, while Abigail did the actual whisking. "Dr. Morrison," Olivia said, appearing in the kitchen with the careful formality she still sometimes used, even though Abigail had been mom number 2 for over a year now. "Daddy wants to know if you need help with anything." "Tell him we're almost ready," Abigail replied, then paused. "And Olivia, you can just call me Abigail, you know, or Mom, or whatever feels right to you." Olivia's smile was radiant. "I know. I just like how official Dr. Morrison sounds. Makes me feel important when I say it." This was the kind of moment that would have terrified Abigail during those first uncertain months. The casual intimacy of a child claiming her as family, the easy assumption that she belonged in this constellation of relationships. But now it just felt natural, like the most obvious thing in the world. "Breakfast is ready," she called out, and within minutes their kitchen table was surrounded by the controlled chaos of their blended family. Ethan, still slightly dusty from the garden, settled into his chair with the contented expression of a man who'd found his purpose in the ordinary magic of weekend mornings. Olivia immediately launched into a detailed explanation of her science project on butterfly metamorphosis, while Grace provided running commentary on everything from the color of her orange juice to the way the sunlight hit her spoon. "So," Ethan said, catching Abigail's eye across the table with the look that still made her heart skip after all this time, "I have news. Good news, or we need to discuss this privately news?" Abigail asked, recognizing the careful tone he used when something significant was brewing. "The best kind of news," he replied, reaching into his pocket and pulling out an envelope. "Green Tech just received approval for the community solar project in Dorchester, the one we've been working on for 2 years. Abigail felt her face light up. She knew how much this project meant to him, bringing sustainable energy to underserved communities, creating jobs, proving that environmental responsibility and social justice could work hand in hand. "Ethan, that's incredible," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "What's a community solar project?" Olivia asked, because 9-year-olds were incapable of letting adult conversations happen without translation. "It means Daddy's company is going to help people have electricity that comes from the sun instead of from things that hurt the environment," Abigail explained. "Like superheroes, but for the planet," Grace announced, with the supreme confidence of a 3-year-old who understood the world in terms of heroes and villains. "Exactly like that," Ethan agreed solemnly. As breakfast continued around them, filled with Grace's chatter about her upcoming ballet recital and Olivia's detailed plans for her summer soccer camp, Abigail found herself marveling at the life they'd built from the ashes of their first attempt at love. It hadn't been easy. There had been sleepless nights when Grace was colicky, arguments about parenting styles, moments when the complicated dynamics of their blended family felt overwhelming. There had been therapy sessions, both individual and couples, where they'd learned to communicate without the protective walls they'd both been so good at building. But there had also been first steps and first words, birthday parties and holiday traditions, quiet moments stolen after the girls were asleep when they could just be Ethan and Abigail, not parents or partners in the complex dance of family life, but simply two people who'd chosen to love each other, despite their fears. "Mama," Grace said suddenly, tugging on Abigail's sleeve, "when I grow up, I want to be a doctor like you and save babies." "That's a wonderful dream, sweetheart," Abigail replied, smoothing Grace's dark hair. "But you can be anything you want to be." "I know," Grace said with the supreme confidence of childhood, "but I want to help people like you help people, and like how you helped me when I was little and needed the hospital." The casual reference to her NICU stay, delivered without drama or sadness, was a reminder of how resilient children could be when surrounded by love and honesty. "You know what I think?" Ethan said, catching Grace's attention. "I think you're going to be amazing at whatever you choose to do." Later that afternoon, after Olivia had left for her weekend with Indira and Grace was napping with Mr. Snuggles clutched firmly in her arms, Abigail found herself in the quiet space of their bedroom, looking through the photo albums that chronicled their journey from heartbreak to healing. There was the ultrasound photo that had started it all, Grace's tiny form visible at 20 weeks. The first picture of her in the NICU, impossibly small but fiercely alive. Photos from Olivia's soccer games and school plays, Grace's first birthday party, family dinners where everyone was talking at once and no one was listening but everyone was happy. "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan said, settling onto the bed beside her. "Just thinking about how different this is from what I imagined my life would look like," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "Better or worse than you imagined?" "Different," she said carefully. "Messier, more complicated, more beautiful than I knew was possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of their house settling around them and Grace's soft breathing through the baby monitor. "Abigail," Ethan said suddenly, his voice carrying the weight of something important. "I have one more piece of news." She turned to look at him, noting the nervous energy in his posture. "What kind of news?" Instead of answering, he reached into his nightstand drawer and pulled out a small velvet box that looked suspiciously similar to the one that had held her promise ring 3 years ago. "The kind of news that requires a very important question," he said, sliding off the bed to kneel beside it. Abigail's breath caught in her throat as he opened the box to reveal a ring that was both elegant and perfectly her, a classic solitaire with Grace's birthstone set into the band alongside their birthstones, creating a small constellation of their family's story. "Abigail Rose Morrison," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. 3 years ago, you gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. You let me learn how to love without fear, how to show up without reservation, how to build something beautiful from broken pieces. Tears were already streaming down her face, but she managed to nod for him to continue. I can't promise you that I'll never make mistakes or that loving me will always be easy, but I can promise that I'll choose you every single day, in the big moments and the small ones, in the joy and the chaos and everything in between. Will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with 3 years of daily choices, countless small acts of love, and the beautiful certainty that came from building something real together. Yes, she said, laughing through her tears. Yes, of course, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, right next to the promise ring she'd never taken off, Abigail felt the deep satisfaction of a story that had found its proper ending. But even as they kissed and laughed and planned how to tell the girls, she knew this wasn't really an ending at all. It was just another beginning, another choice to build something beautiful from love and hope, and the courage to believe that second chances could become forever. And sometimes, she thought, as Grace's sleepy voice called for Mama through the monitor, and Ethan went to get their daughter so they could share the news as a family, the most extraordinary love stories were the ones that looked exactly like ordinary life, filled with pancake breakfasts and scraped knees and bedtime stories, and the daily miracle of choosing each other, over and over again. Because that, she realized, was what happily ever after actually looked like. Not perfect, but perfectly theirs. If you could rewrite your own love story, would you have the courage to fight for a second chance when everything seemed lost? What would you be willing to change about yourself for the person you truly love? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.